Hello and welcome back to the Handstandcast with me, Emmett Lewis, and my host, Mikael Christiansen. How's it going, Mikael?
Yeah, not too bad. Just got back from a massive artistic research creation period. So still kind of beat up both physically and mentally from that, but yeah, pretty good.
Nice, nice. Yeah, so just to give people a bit of a rundown, what we're going to do today is Mikael's been working on this project, which he was going to tell you a bit about, and I'm going to interrogate him slightly about the project and artistic process and other stuff that goes into making something. It's quite for me, because I've been looking in from the outside of this project. It's been very interesting because, as I understand it, Mikael and the team he's working with, the company, are they're trying to basically come up with a new creative way of doing handstands because they are all mega beasts on their hands, like highest technical kind of level. But as you get really good at these things, you kind of get a bit bored with just plain technique, and all handstand acts in some way are very similar, I suppose.
Yeah.
So then what they've been trying to do is make something new and interesting and a new creative dialogue, I suppose, with hand balance. So
Yeah. Yeah, that sums up kind of what we're trying to do. I would say in a
yeah.
decent way.
So yeah, Mika, why don't you just give us tell us a bit about the starting point for the project, or how you came up with, like, let's go and try and do this.
Yeah, so starting point was, I think, uh so the starting point is kind of really in one sense separated from what we do now, but still, like in 2015, I think it was, I was kind of watching various like handstand acts, and like I was performing a lot with the show knitting piece that I was in, and I really just like felt the same kind of alienation that a lot of hand balancers feel from their discipline, in terms of the, how to say, the method of display and kind of the way of doing handstands, because it's like with all circus, but I think in one sense, particularly with handstands, a lot of the presentation method is very like, you have this one side of it which is very just explicitly athletic and practically gymnastics in
Yeah,
its execution. Kind of just stand on your hands, learn these techniques, get really good at them, and then be so good at them that you can perform them on stage, and then try to fit that into some sort of context where you're either like exploring an artistic concept or making some sort of like either narrative or task that needs to be done, or a specific
yeah,
aesthetic or mood and so on. So I remember I was like looking through a lot, and just like I just noticed that I didn't like anything like when I was looking at it. And
yeah,
it's not because really people, it's not because people were making bad art. It's just that I find the I was constantly questioning the reason for standing on your hands when you are on stage. Like, what are you trying to say, or what are you trying to do with it? And I was making this kind of dumb little analysis. I would just check, like, I would pretend that I didn't know anything about handstands, and I would look at various acts and just go like, for how many handstands would the act keep me invested? So
yeah,
in sense of just like, I would try to make it this kind of curve where I would imagine it's okay, like, person is on stage, present themselves in whatever way they're doing, and at some point they enter into a handstand, and um, at that point I would try to figure out, like, so for how many times can they actually repeat this thing of standing upside down, or for how long before I kind of start dwindling my interest. Because I would notice that I would very often just skip through the acts to see, like, okay, what does this person do, like what technical things does the person do. And then, like, all you,
yeah,
like, what you're doing then is just you're looking at gymnastics. You're basically just looking, okay, he did this one, he's that one, he did this one, and he's that one. Okay, then I know the general kind of skill level of the person. Done. There's not much more to be seen. Like that, I started to get into that mode because I've just
yeah,
seen so many acts, and then uh,
yeah.
I've
Definitely. Sorry,
yeah,
just go. I
go
can
on.
kind of, if you've watched a lot of handstand acts, it's very. There was kind of quite a formula I can remember even when I was in circus school and other stuff of a handstand act. It was like someone will come out and they have a character that's kind of defined by their costume more than anything else. they'd have like, oh, whatever it is, like I'm a guitar player, I'm a drunk, I'm a ballerina, something kind of archetypal, and then the second they
Archetypical, I think.
archetypal. Someone can tell us how in the voice notes how to say that word if you want. But yeah, they'd come out, and you get this a lot in a lot of circus acts every. It's not just handstands where it's like, come out and go, here's my character defined by my costume and some slight mannerisms. And then the second the apparatus, you get on the apparatus or you start doing the skill, all the mannerisms and all the other stuff of the character disappear. And this is quite a common kind of circus style that was, hopefully it's fading. It's very it's pantomime-ish or something. I think.
Yeah, and it's kind of difficult to go away from as well, because like it's and it is an interesting discussion kind of in the broader sense of performance and circus. It's also like, why do we want to go away from it? Like when I was in circus school, we would discuss this a lot. It's like we're actually doing circus and we're trying to find loads and loads of reasons for going away from this thing, like the actual skill thing that we're doing, or the actual kind of the particularities of the circus. We're trying to find a reason for them to exist by doing something else. And like, I mean, that is kind of an open-ended discussion in terms of taste and like loads of things for me. So it's not about saying that is necessarily bad or good, but I found, at least as a person, I found that this would get less and less interesting. And I would find that like after about 4 to 5 handstands, like the interest would dwindle. And like, especially when it comes to one arms, because one arms is essentially like, I mean, on higher levels of skill, like that's what people present. And the fact remains that like the amounts of like, because what the basic thing you are presenting on stage when you're presenting handstands, you're presenting virtuosity, like I am good at doing this thing. So you're displaying control, like I can control the situation. And you are displaying like the kind of various kind of beautiful geometry that you can create with your body in various senses. And the fact that like this beautiful geometry is very limited in what it can do, because like there are rather few types of positions. Like, I mean, I broadly, this is very broadly, but I broadly define it in kind of 4 categories of just regular handstand technique, if we're not talking about contortion. And that is like the straight shapes, it's the flags, it's the figa types, and it's the press types. And all of them like kind of make it kind of a specific type of shape of the body. And then the rest is basically just variations and transitions within that framework. So there isn't that much to do. And like after you've seen a bunch of variations, like how much are you actually adding to your performance and to the kind of the energy, the mood, the atmosphere by I did a figa and then like 1 minute later I do a figa with my legs closed. Like the geometry is very similar. There isn't much to see like in terms of the visual side of things. But for me as a hand balancer or other hand balancers, they go, okay, this is a higher level of skill. I will give it a higher level of praise. Whereas in the real performative context, this isn't really the how it works, because people have no idea. And also, like, if you kind of analyze it, what are you doing that legs together figa for? Is it like, are you trying to just gather like, how to call it, social currency by displaying that, hey, I'm a bit better than the next guy, so
I'm better than the guy who just done a normal figa.
Yeah, I'm a bit cool because of that. So that was kind of like one thing that made me want to just try to do something else with it. And this was the kind of ongoing struggle I had to school through, like what am I trying to achieve with the skill? And of course you can go deep with that within any discipline or anything and end up in like basically a reductionistic nowhere. But to get to the point, I wanted to try to just like explore, so what the hell happens if you take a bunch of people and you do handstands all the time? So basically it's kind of like subverting the expectations of, because if you look at the Chinese circus act, that's kind of the polar opposite. Like there you in practice have a person that's on their hands all of the time doing nothing else, and they just slam through all of the positions on one arm, change to the other, and keep repeating for 4.5 minutes. And it is absolutely amazing on a physical level, but it reaches this kind of flat line very early where kind of you have no breaks, so you don't have time to take in what has been going on, and it becomes uninteresting because the kind of you just set the bar unbelievably high, and then you go nowhere from there. So like it's crazy, but like it doesn't travel, it doesn't evolve, and I wanted then to see like, okay, so if that is what happens with one person, like what happens if we take a group of people? Like what if we're not focusing on the solo individual and kind of the virtuosity and like the skill presentation of this one person? And that like basically like in 2015 I applied for some money here in Sweden. I got for doing a project I called Handstand Forest, which is essentially just an artistic research with a bunch of hand balancers. So I gathered a bunch of people, some from the circus school here in Stockholm and some from abroad, and we just basically did, I think we were 9 in total, and we just did a week where we just played around and tried out various concepts. We were trying to create kind of practices, as they speak a lot about in dance, where you instead of having like trying to do a trick or a sequence, more like finding a way of working, a way of practicing together within a certain framework. So so that was kind of like the beginning, and from there we created a bunch of these practices, like, and we kind of started giving them names and to kind of identify like, okay, so yeah, so here we're moving with this kind of quality, here we're relating to each other in a specific way. We would create these kind of like communications or like ways of communicating upside down, so that you could kind of have an idea of what was going on in the room around you. And then like we were going to have a presentation, and I was like really we were kind of really wondering, okay, so what are we going to do about this? Because it was just like we were going to present what we were doing on a Friday there. And I remember I was waking up and I looked at it was kind of the upper corner of the ceiling in the room I was sleeping. And like it was an old it was at my ex-girlfriend's place, and it was an old student apartment, so it was kind of moldy up in the corner, not a lot, but you could see a little bit of mold. And I was
the
like,
classic
hey,
student apartment.
Yeah, very much. But like that mold just like made like this like entire rush of imagery go through my head, though. Just like fuck, like basically, how can I explain? The imagery sequence that made through my head was basically like I was just imagining this wooden panel that would stand for 200 years, and first it would start to mold, then it would start to rot and warp, and in the end degenerate and become dirt. Which is obviously what will happen through decay and decomposition. And then I started thinking, okay, but what if this is what we're doing with our handstands, from these kind of very, very straight and rigid shapes that have a specific purpose and a very clear technique to kind of decay and growth. And so suddenly we started as a group to come up with a bunch of these metaphors, and like, because those metaphors started to inform kind of our practices as well. So suddenly we found a concept we called rooting, where it was kind of, we created this game of grabbing onto someone that is in handstand and starting manipulating them as if our hands were roots, and like tons of things like that we kind of began playing with.
Cool. Can I just talk in a bit about that, because you said some very interesting things that
absolutely
people will miss over. So one of the interesting things you just pointed out there, that whether you're informed by it or not, this concept of decay and internal metaphor, it comes up a lot in Buto dance from Japan. It's one of the founding kind of things, is that what I find interesting about Buto, I've been doing a bit more research on it lately, they have these very strict, rigid, informed technical practices to establish it, certain ways of walking, certain ways of holding the body, very similar to handstand, that you're searching for this infinite perfection. But then the dance is created via an internal metaphor. You kind of hit one of the key Buto ones when you start learning Buto, is you're a flower and you start wilting. And then obviously you don't want to pantomime like, oh, I'm a big flower, like I'm a tree and now I'm a seed. But it's more like, what is the internal imagery that flower collapsing from the inside downwards as it decays or as it breaks down, and how does that inform your standing posture
Exactly.
and slowly go down. So it's very interesting that you're kind of pushing, how to describe it. I've done one weekend class with an Italian guy on Buto, whose name I forget, but I'll try to figure it out for the notes. It was very good, really good. And he's described as the only European who can actually do Buto by some Japanese legend. So
Okay.
whether, I don't know enough to assess that completely. But he was using all these metaphors and all these other ones. And that was one of the first ones, like this rotting. But he described Buto as we have two dances, the dance of light and the dance of dark. So the dance of light is very straight up. What you see is what you get. You have technique, you have choreography, and it is inspired by technique and choreography. And then we have Buto and other dance forms as well, which is dance of dark, where it's like we have an internal metaphor that will probably not become clear to the person, or an internal story or an internal script that the dancers and the company will know. And it probably won't become obvious to the audience at any stage, but they're still watching it, and you're trying to transfer this kind of whole sense of I don't know, vibrancy or emotion or something or atmosphere that's generated by this. So Absolutely. This is why you get a Buto. It can be very, it's kind of comes from post-war Japan, and a lot of it is very disturbing imagery and disturbing kind of, some people are saying it was dealing with the psychological trauma of the nuclear bombs being dropped was the initial kind of work of Buto. So it's just interesting that you have a bunch of mega technical beasts who can basically, everyone can just do everything, like in all the basic repertoire. But then it's like, okay, well, we're actually gonna take these metaphors and turn them into something.
Yeah.
So
yeah, because I think that like there is a lot of that thinking in contemporary dance and like contemporary how's the thing what's it called, physical theater and circus and so on, where you use these kind of internal representations to basically color the way that you move, the way that you act, and it's done by creating, like, because it's funny in I remember when I started circus, people would talk about telling a story in your piece and so on, and I thought that like it needed to have a narrative, but it doesn't. Like the story that matters, I think, is it can be a narrative, but what matters is that you're able to kind of fill your performative state with something, so that it's not just empty choreography that you repeat the same movements that you have done 100 times. That is also necessary, but that then those movements can be colored by the state that you're in, and being able to do that is something that it takes these practices very often then by improv, for example, where you just like you immerse yourself in that state for long enough so that you get to know it and you can kind of trigger it almost by will. And like, so basically, like, to continue on to what actually became the Váld project and the company Right Way Down, because like the things I just spoke about now and before was kind of the precursor to the Váld project. But essentially, like, I was thinking about this for many years, and like we were talking a little bit with some members of like, or there's some of the people that ended up being in the Váld project, like now and then from like 2015 to 2018. And in 2018, I was kind of like, I was fed up by myself not doing anything about it. So I was just, I just told the others, okay, fuck it, now let's try to do this. And then there were 5 people that I had worked with in that first group when we did the Handstand forest research, that I knew that like we were vastly different as people. Like we had like loads of different interests in terms of like what we were doing in handstands and in general. But we had like loads of complementary attributes, I would say. So I basically invited them to be part of this project and to create this company together. And that's also where it moved from being like, because for me, like it's kind of one of the basic tenets of this project was that it was supposed to be kind of a group thing. And hence I didn't want to be the director of this company. Like that was never the intention. And I wanted us to create together, because basically I think that all of these people are fucking brilliant artists, and we'll list all of them in the description and I'll mention them also now. But like basically the project would be a lot less rich if I was calling the shots. Because certainly I have some ideas, but like it's for me, it's been really important that it's kind of also about ownership and about people being able to to try out the things that they want, because like we're many voices in this, and if it's going to be a group effort, it needs to be a proper one. But essentially, the people in the project were, so it was me, it was a girl named Sunniva Byvard from Denmark. She's also like, everyone is from Doc. It is a girl named Lisa Angberg. It's a guy named Isak Arvidsson. It is also from Sweden, those two. Matt Pasquette and Imogen Hussle from the UK. And did I miss anyone? It's me, Isak. No, that was everyone, I think. Wait, me, Isak, Matt, Sunniva, Imogen, and Lisa. Yeah, that was everyone. So we, like, yeah, as I said, everyone's really different in their approaches and their ways of working, and being able to use that kind of as a strength, and trying to then, as we formed the company, we started discussing like, okay, so what was the direction we wanted to take this, and we wanted to make a stage show that would be capable of like basically touring a larger stages. And so I applied for money then for doing this, because in Sweden they have like pretty good grant applications for like creating your own projects. And this is kind of like a little bit the kind of Scandinavian Nordic style of making circus nowadays, is really that you, like, so many people that I know, it's kind of the norm up here in Sweden, at least, to that, like, people work in like companies and do all kinds of stuff, but eventually most people I know, they apply for money, they work for a few years to, like we did, to kind of actually get money. They start creating their own projects that they then tour. So I mean, it can be on smaller or larger scales. Ours is on a larger scale, of course, because we are 6 people on stage, which then requires a substantial amount of money to create the project, because you want to be able for everyone to actually have paid creation periods and so on. But we did get a substantial sum of money. I think we, in total, with the various co-productions through a couple of what are they called, production spaces, such as one called Dansinitiativet, the dance initiative in the north of Sweden. We got support and co-production by them. We got support and co-production by a place called Dynamo Workspace. We'll link all of these in the description as well. And we were supported by Bird Milk Collective in Berlin. We were supported by also a place called Västmanlands Teatern, I think they're called, here in Sweden, which is basically various places and institutions that have supported us, either with space to rehearse and create, or funds, or help with eventual touring and production things and so on. And so basically we have started to create the project ourselves, and it's now kind of in kind of a mid stage, I would say. We've done, like, because what you do when you create these kind of shows like this is basically you look for what's called residencies, which is then places that offer, sometimes they offer finances as well, but primarily they offer a space to stay, a space to create and rehearse, and possibly other kind of production
support
means.
These are kind of quite a common way. It's kind of one of those things, I suppose. In Europe, it's quite common that there's a lot of government support through various arts agencies, and it's a very interesting kind of process, because you kind of have to prove you can do something first. And then when they see you're a bit more serious, they'll give you a bit of money. And then when they see you can deliver with that small amount of money, they'll give you more money. And you can get up to quite substantial amounts of money. I know people like in Ireland who've gotten like $250,000 for productions and spectacle. Like starting off with like, here's €500, come back to us and let me know. So it's very, I think it's very interesting, because a lot of the time as well, it's not a commercial project from the arts agency. They don't expect you to make a return. You know, it's great if you do. It's great if you make something that can be commercialized and become a touring show or a gallery show or sell some art. But one of the things is just like, okay, they just want to see that you actually make work from it. And this kind of takes a lot of pressure out of artists, I think, to have this kind of support. Where you're like, okay,
it's exceptionally. I mean, there's a lot of like difficulties with it as well, like in terms of like the precarity of like the artist or performing artist situation in general, like even before COVID-19. But The fact that they exist here is really good, because it means that like there is a possibility for people to have a vision and work on it and over time create something.
Yeah.
So like, but for Váld's sake, Váld is basically the name of the show that the company Right Way Down is now creating. It's like we've done a few of these residencies, working on it for a few weeks at a time, gathering the crew, which is a total mess and really difficult when everyone are like working artists doing things in several companies at a time and so on.
Yeah.
But we've now been able to. So what we did was that we took Wald means forest in German, and it's basically just kind of a name that we took to have a name for the project. And
classic.
Yeah,
We need a name for this shit. What do we call it?
we need a name for the fucking show. What do we do? Let's just call it something. And we're working a lot there with like those kind of like that metaphorical kind of landscape we began with in 2015. This is what we're basically taken further and started to create various concepts and scenes, moods, and so on to be able to use as kind of the exploration. And the exploration itself also stems a lot from the fact that like hand balancer bodies are extremely specifically trained. Like, I mean, we essentially have 4 legs, and that's a little bit the point that like we want to kind of create this kind of, I want the audience to forget sometimes that we're standing on our hands, because like to be able to create this kind of like double layer of performance where you're looking at something with a very high level of virtuosity, even if we just stand on 2 arms, like creating imagery with that, and like that you kind of it becomes such a self-evident thing, because you've seen in the same way actually as the Chinese circus actors say, okay, but I take it for granted because the person is so good on their hands, and you forget the point that like they're actually doing something physically impressive, but in a different way than the Chinese artist does, by just doing like more, like additively more and more technique. I want it to kind of be a level of reflection that you forget and then you remember again, and then you forget again. So that's kind of like an ongoing thing through the show, that like suddenly you go like, fucking hell, they're actually doing like this is really impressive and incredible what they're doing. But then you can actually allow yourself to forget that and be taken by the kind of either mood or concept or atmosphere, character, whatever we are doing on stage.
Nice.
So that has been like one of the things that we've been trying to do. We've created like loads of group scenes, and like I said in the beginning, we just finished up a residency now in Denmark, in Odense, a city where this place I mentioned before, Dynamo Workspace. It's an incredible space for creation, for they have a festival, like they do tons of different circus things. So if you're in Denmark and don't know about them, you should definitely check them out. They have loads of great stuff there. But we were now there for 2 weeks, and the funny thing is that like this comes now I'm going to go more into kind of the challenges of actually creating work, because like it's so funny, because we decided we came together with this common idea of creating this kind of group cohesion and this group dynamic, and we created so much material around that, which was great, but we also wanted to kind of get the individuals kind of to show in this show, because like there's so much that's just basically done by everyone at the same time, that we wanted the individual to show, but we kind of got a bit lost. And this is what I find really interesting, and kind of the difficulties of creating, is that like you will begin in a direction and you'll kind of go real deep and like invest very strongly into like, okay, this idea or a certain way that you want it to move. Maybe you have a narrative that you really want to follow, or like a specific thing you want the audience to experience, or the show, you want the show to say a specific thing, and then you entirely absorb yourself into those ideas, and as with all things bias, you tend to forget about other things.
Yeah.
So now when we were in Denmark, we invited a good friend of all of us, a guy named Tom Brand, who he works in the circus company Váld, and he is a rather brilliant rope climber, and general his movement artistry is also great, and he has a very good eye for kind of to capture and see dynamics on stage. So he gave us loads of challenges, and kind of he really basically challenged a lot of our concepts by going, okay, yeah, so you are now trying to achieve this and this kind of dynamic or energy on stage, whereas what you're actually expressing to the outside is something else. And this is what basically a lot of people like, because we knew we were doing that too, but we needed someone from the outside to give us like literally what we call, and what they call in the industry, an outside eye. Basically a person coming in, looking at what you do, so that you can get an idea of like what the hell is actually going on, what are we actually doing. Because in our heads we think, oh yeah, but this scene is really great because this thing comes after, and then that creates this energy. But like, is it really like? And this is like, you kind of you create kind of a blindness through the investment into the concepts, and it's necessary to go for those things, but you also then need someone on the outside to challenge it. And that has kind of been like the latest stages of what we've done so far.
Yeah, it's definitely one of these things, I suppose. You think you're painting red and you're actually painting blue.
Yeah.
And it's there's always this thing. I'm sure even like people who are just listening and who are just starting handstands, we can just say it very simply. It's like, you think you're pointing your toes. You look at the video, you're not pointing your toes.
Yeah.
You need that kind of outside eye. And it goes all the thing, because like you get an emotional and physical response to where you're performing, and you think, oh, this emotional and physical response to what I'm filling into my tricks is there, but it's not coming across, or it's not coming the right way.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, it's really interesting. Just these kind of, always this show and tell bit, I suppose, is quite nice. I always remember like, they've done enough kind of similar things with being the outside eye for enough places where you go in and they go like, well, what did you think? Like, well, actually. So just to segue back actually to the show, Mikael, I was wondering if you could pick one of the sequences in the piece, whatever, and just talk us through a bit of like, just a bit about it and what's behind it. Because, hopefully people go see the show, and, I know you guys will have had a trailer up. I'm not sure if that's still up.
Yeah, trailer is still up.
But maybe talk about like, because there's two things I can remember from the trailer. One, it was the mass of people on the floor, and then someone kind of bursting out of that into a handstand being rocked up. There was another one where everyone was on canes, kind of moving slightly desynced. So there was that. But maybe like for me, I think the people coming out of the floor. Now I'll explain what I got from the imagery of it, and then you can tell me how right or wrong I was. So what it looked like, it was like we had a blob, I was saying, water or some kind of liquid, and then it was coalescing. And then every now and then, as you know, when water kind of swirls up, like a big, either a wave or a column of water will shoot up and then fall back into it. So that's kind of what I was getting out of the imagery and the kind of thing. But maybe, I don't know if you still have that scene, but maybe if you could say what you guys were playing with in that, or what came of it.
So first of all, now I'm wondering, because the blob is in the show, but I'm not sure if the blob is actually in the trailer. I'm wondering if you remember the blob from another presentation that I sent you specifically, just in terms of our readers, so that you go and look at this trailer and say, where the hell is this image that Emmet is talking about? I'm not. It might be that it's in the trailer. I just don't remember. But the blob is certainly there. So this like really comes down to a lot of kind of the kind of metaphorical framework that we're working with in the show, and like the blob is one that we are using quite a lot, and something that we created one of these practices around. Like, we basically created just a breathing practice and a movement practice within the blob to make sure that like we can feel each other, because it's like a lot of this show has a very kind of precious precious qualities to them in sense that like if we're in the blob and we all breathe together in the same timing, it looks great. But if one person doesn't, it's very jarring, and the eye immediately goes to the thing that kind of isn't really fitting with it. But like for the scene itself, like this was really kind of the idea of kind of growth and evolution and kind of this unshaped kind of form that is kind of growing, and it doesn't really have any specific shape to it in terms like it's not trying to look like anything, it just simply is there. And like we basically took inspiration from things evolving, from basically like I think the first idea for that blob came from like I was envisioning the primordial ooze like years ago, just like imagining the kind of something like a abstract entity of liquidy something that just like evolves and changes, and then somehow something else kind of is created out of it. So there is like the entire like a lot of the material in the first part of the show as it is now deals with this kind of evolutionary thing, and we're really trying to have like a how to say showing not telling approach. Like we don't want there to be kind of a spoon feeding thing like check out, now we're this, now we're that, like because if we're doing that I feel like we're kind of forcing the audience to
swallow what you're feeding them basically.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas when we have presented it, what I've been very happy about, just as like you say now you start talking about like water and waves and something coming out of that. Other people have talked about grass growing in fast, like if you see kind of a time lapse of something growing, like so people come out and give us a lot of this kind of imagery that isn't the same, like but it's similar, it's within a certain, like you could kind of say that like there's a certain scope, there's a certain angle which things will be viewed from more or less, and that is kind of what we wish to be able to make it associative and potent in that sense, rather than having a direct a spoon feeding of like okay, this scene is about that, whereas like the imagery kind of displays and hints towards things so that it's also up to a person's own imagination. And I think also when we worked with this guy Tom, our outside eye, that was something he stressed a lot, that like for us as performers to find within each scene what does it mean for us, because that is ultimately like I kind of look upon performance a lot in terms of sub-communication, just like, I mean, because that's what it, I mean, it's basic human communication. It's just that we're putting it on the stage with certain rules and creating kind of a social contract that I am performing for you and you're in the audience. But if we're feeling nothing, and again, if we're just doing choreo, we're not able to bring the same kind of investment into each movement, into each little thing we do, which will like, and it's funny because the audience notices these kind of things. Like you don't know that you notice, but you do. And I think one of the best examples of this kind of thing is like, if you see someone on stage who's uncomfortable, you will feel uncomfortable very fast, but you won't know why you feel the person is uncomfortable. It can be something as simple as the flicker of an eye, or like slightly higher body tension in the arms of the person than a relaxed person would be. And you could maybe not even put a finger on it unless you'd see a video of it several times in a row, but the like kind of your body notices so fast. And it's the same when you see kind of the investment in people. So like finding that kind of richness within ourselves as we perform is like very much a must in a piece like this, since like, of course there is impressive techniques such as you mentioned with like all of the legs in the air, like these kind of imagery that we're working a lot with, kind of like flowery, blooming, blossoming kind of thing. This is very like quote unquote easy for us to make look good, because all we do, we jump into handstand, we time the legs and everything goes right and it looks great. And
Yeah.
that's something we also understood, that like, hey, this is what we actually master. This is what we're really good at. So we don't need to work on the big pictures as much, because they're basically just about following a count of a music, or having a cue, or having a communication in handstand, so that we do it like at the right time. Whereas finding these kind of subtleties is so much where this kind of work is. So I kind of I compare it a lot to kind of contemporary dance in one sense, in type in a lot of its working methods. Though we have also been very clear, like in the group, that like we really don't want this to be, oh, we are doing a contemporary dance show, but we can handstand. Like, if that's kind of something we want to not do, and rather also kind of have a more kind of specific circusy approach to it.
Yeah, this is kind of, I suppose, it's one of these challenges that circus is kind of facing to define itself as a higher art form as it progresses from, just if we go back to the earliest days of circus and things, it was just like death-defying feat and sparkly costumes and no narrative, no drama. The only people who would kind of have characters, I suppose, would be clowns. And this kind of thing
there is though some a little bit in the vaudeville era. You find like occasional videos of amazing, like really interesting things, and in that sense. But in general,
but I think it's kind of that idea of like trying to find one of these things that always kind of annoyed me in some ways in circus is that whenever I'd be doing shows, a lot of the time it would be, I've had more dance directors directing circus shows than I've had circus directors.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there's a limitation on circus directors, and a lot of the pieces I've done in shows would have been kind of bigger productions. So then it's like, okay, we need a budget, we need someone who can deliver, blah, blah, blah. But it's still, there was always coming in with this dance creative practice and vocabulary to try and put upon the circus artist. And then you got basically that kind of thing. Circus artists doing a contemporary dance show. And it's impressive. Like circus artists, dancers, everything, they have physically impressive bodies and physically impressive skills and things, but it's always kind of slightly jarring. I don't know, circus artists doing choreography.
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly can be done nicely, and I've seen like loads of dance with circus people that are amazing, and I know like dancers turn circus artists and circus artists turn dancers.
Yeah,
well, that is it's not a problem, but what I think is just the thing is to at least when beginning a creation, to be clear, so what kind of thing are we trying to do here? And I think that there are things within the circus tradition that is valuable, and that shouldn't be forgotten, and particularly with what we do, like we're basically the fundamental starting point. Everyone in this show is super duper comfortable on their hands because they've spent so much time on it in this very artificial, stranger environment of learning to master every single movement on your arms. Like it's like starting from there and exploring the options specifically of these bodies with where all of us are understanding kind of the reaches and the limitations of what these bodies can do. So whereas like someone who'd come in and go, hey, but can you try this, or what about that, or like things that would where someone who knows handstand would just like not ask those questions, because they would like it's like a friend of mine, he does aerial straps. He once told me like he was doing like a massive production in a huge theater with a theater director, and he was supposed to like do flying straps really high above the audience in the end of the show. And he said like it was 1 week until premiere, and they had bought this massive fuck off motor to like his winch to get him down above the audience, and he's hanging up there doing his sequence, and he finishes one part, and then the director screams up to him, hey, so here, this is the part where I want you to fly around in a circle. And he's like, I'm hanging statically straight down. Where do you imagine I'm suddenly going to get this speed from? Because like, I mean, like the guy had just like had the kind of an image that he wanted to portray, but he didn't understand the specificities of what the hell is going on with the discipline. And that is of course just one specific example of like a rigging and kind of technical issue in that sense. But also when it comes to the bodies and the particularities that can be looked into, I think that is one of the things that I'm really or that we are all in this project very, very interested in. And what we now found is that like we need to to be able to bring out the strengths of our group work, for example, because we have created so much group work, but we found that like, oh shit, we need to find times for the individuals, and not only for showing each person. It's not about like we need to display each person as kind of like as if it's this kind of a presentation line, but it's for the eye of the audience, because if you look at an entire group moving together for 35 minutes, then again it becomes a flat line, it becomes blurry, it becomes like you fall asleep, while as our outside eye said, he said like finding ways of like quote unquote wake up the audience, and that can be by such subtle and interesting things, like such things as if everyone is in movement and everyone stops suddenly. That is a wake up, like something changed, or like you've been working in a group like very kind of intrinsically for 7 minutes, and boom, like the group is suddenly not the focus anymore, and you're watching one person, like having the ability to create those kind of like changes in how to call it, changes in attention, I think is what is important. And in terms of a circus show, of course, like we're trying to create something with very kind of, it's dumb to say, we want something of high artistic quality. We want something that is unique and special in its own way, but we also want it to be entertaining and interesting to watch. And this is also a little bit of like that issue, like are you like, because so loads of people are into these extremely process oriented performances where like basically the performer is doing the same thing for 45 minutes, and if you're into that's great. Like it's not particularly my cup of tea either, because it's for me the problem is about attention. That like if I start losing attention on what's going on, or if I want to look at my phone or start thinking for too long about what I'm going to have for dinner or whatever, like the show is losing me. So being able to have those kind of wake up calls in terms of like dynamic changes are really important, because like the fact is we are working with practically only handstands for almost a 1 hour show, and that is going to be very challenging at times to keep that attention. And that is why like we need to look elsewhere for dramaturgical development, compared to like if you take, say, like it's a very little bit of a classic circus show. Like you have the various disciplines, which means that by definition you have variation. Variation is a very kind of key key tool for circus, and the various disciplines also carry different levels of energy by default, because you can do if you do an aerial hoop act, it's very unlikely, maybe it's possible, but it's very unlikely the aerial hoop act will have the same energy as like a 5-person teeterboard act. Like there's just like very different dynamics to it. And like I love the teeterboard as an example, because like in literally any show where a teeterboard is present and you're creating that show, at that point in the dramaturgical curve where you want the energy to go sky high and create kind of a crescendo or a peak, you can simply put an energetic teeterboard act, and you by default have it. Because people are flying 7 meters in the air, so it will
watch someone about to die.
Like I mean, sure, there's possible to do other types of teeterboard acts too, but like in its inherent state, it carries a lot of that, while the handstand in this kind of like slower contemplative control display does not like, it's very hard to create something extremely dynamic and very very different from other handstands. So we're rather trying to reach those kind of or that like manipulating that energy curve and attention curve through the show by other means.
It's definitely it's kind of interesting. I think you guys are like, we've had this in juggling for quite some time.
Definitely.
And you see like it's juggling's been kind of the forefront of these kind of, we're just doing juggling for 40-minute 60-minute kind of shows. You see companies like Gandini Juggling Project, one of my favorite companies. They've definitely dealt with these kind of issues that you're discussing. It's like we have a limitation imposed by the discipline, but how do we work around it? How do we stay true to the discipline without fake creating it? So it's kind of like what really interests me about your project is that it's kind of breaking ground in hand balance, because this kind of thing hasn't been done before in terms of like a pure hand balance show.
Yeah, I at least haven't seen, and I mean I've seen like large group acts and stuff like Chinese style, and a few other places. I know Triptych by Seven Fingers, they did a longer piece in part of a 3-part show, which was kind of hand balance related. I haven't seen it, but one of the guys in our show, Matt, he was performing in it, and he says that like the intention and qualities worked with are very different in these two, which I think is great. That like we're not I mean I like I said, I haven't seen their show, so I don't know anything about it, but like I think it's cool that like we're at least not doing the same as them. But I think
it's also like just sorry, could cross you. Just one of these things where like it's an interesting starting point, because the practices, like say I've worked a bit with the Gandinis in London, and I had a lot of classes with Sean and Cathy when I was in Circus Space. They're fantastic, and they have a lot of process now that they've built up over the years of how they work with their artists, how they communicate, how they devise shows. And it's uniquely Gandini-ish that everything does get a Gandini flavor, even if they have an outside director, because of all these processes and other stuff that they built up from their very first beginnings back in the 90s all the way now. So it's interesting that you guys are kind of at this thing that you're beginning to almost make a handstand performative dialogue and theory, or maybe it'll just be unique to the company, but where it'll just be like, oh well, we've done this before, and you know, we showed that show and we put it away for a while, and we're going to go like, oh, we're going to make a new show, and you know, maybe some of the artists won't make it, or you know, not, you know, have a couple of new people, but then you'll be able to kind of indoctrinate them into your way of working, your way of creating, and your performative states that are quite
like I have no idea whether or not this will be it might be a one-off in terms of like the only hand balancing kind of thing, for my sake, but that is impossible to know at this point. But like referring back to what you said about juggling, I think it's very relevant, because juggling has the possibly of all the circus disciplines and of many performative things in general, it has a very wide array of things, since like juggling has this kind of like the entire thing of object manipulation. Like you can, like if you change the object from like a ring to a pillow, like each object will have so many particularities to them, that you can constantly find new ways of doing things, because of each thing has its texture, its shape, its unique kind of physical properties. So like I've been rather inspired also by that, because you can, like, there are like also the juggling community is a bit unique in circus, since there's so many people that aren't necessarily doing circus that are jugglers and that are really fucking good. But it seems that like in juggling, people are very aware of kind of the history of juggling, so that like when new things come out, like there seems to, at least often from my limited knowledge, that like people know what has been done before, and that people are kind of pushing those limits. And of course, like my main source of juggling exposure has been the Stockholm environment, which has a kind of a distinct style, but
has a
like
distinct beast mode.
They're absolutely crazy, and there's like loads of very interesting things that came out of here. And then I've traveled other places and seen completely different things, and I was like, oh shit, this is really different from the stuff that I'm used to, just because like I basically only saw like a set number of extremely good jugglers working like through kind of like the methods of Jay Gilligan and Erik Oberg. No, Erik Oberg, right?
Yeah, Erik Oberg.
Yeah, I always confuse him with Peter Oberg. But yeah, so like I've seen it mainly from here, and again, like my knowledge of juggling is rather limited, but it's there is so much exploration being done within that discipline, since you can't change the parameters easily, while in hand balancing, there are very few parameters to manipulate. And like
I'm gonna throw something at you here that you touched on at the start of the thing. So in classical juggling, we have 3 basic objects, and the kind of one of the themes in the last decade was to find the 4th object. But you have ball-like objects, you have stick-like objects, which are clubs, and you have ring-like objects. These are your classical juggling props. You, at the start of the show, said, I divided my shapes into basically 4 categories. We have the Fika type ones, the straight type shapes, the flag type shapes, and the press type shapes. So within that, you kind of have like the limitations that juggling has in that. And then it's like, well, how do we actually come up with a way of making this interesting?
Yeah, I mean, when you speak about that, like my thoughts immediately go to breakdancing, and like the first thing that struck my mind is just the Air Baby stuff. Because there's like, you just need to look at Rubber Legs or any of those guys, and the amount of variations they have down in that area on one arm is staggering and absolutely ridiculous. And it's kind of almost shameful for hand balancing that it hasn't come up with more vocabulary compared to what just a handful of people doing breaking has done in like just a few years. That's putting it on the point, of course. I mean, like it's not taking anything away from hand balancing, but again, it goes a little bit into that thing we talked about before, whereas like the practice and the tradition of the discipline kind of imposes a certain way of thinking and working, where it kind of just like streamlines it into as kind of hierarchical set of moves that have higher and higher social values in a sense within the community. It's kind of dumb in that sense, but I mean most of human interaction really
like
ends
stamp
up being
collecting. This stamp is slightly better than that one. Why?
Yeah, exactly.
Why not?
It's literally that through
my Pokemon card is better than your Pokemon card.
Yeah, like I'm drinking more special coffee than the other guy, and so on. So
my coffee has more butter in it than your coffee.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous in that sense, but it is what it is. But I think that it's at least good to be aware of these things, and especially when it comes to creation, because ultimately performance comes. I mean, for me, like more than anything, like performance comes down to being able to hold attention. Because like I have seen, like I remember, like one of the strongest and both worst and best dance shows I've ever seen was a piece. I can't remember who choreographed it, but I saw it. It was like the graduation piece of the dance class at the school I was at. And the first 20 minutes of the show was just all of the dancers standing in a row, really slowly opening their mouths. So they were just opening their mouths for 20 minutes in silence. And you just sit there and it's like, okay, this is nothing. But 10 minutes have passed and it's like, is her mouth open? Yeah, it actually is. 15 minutes, okay, I get it. And like actually something interesting happens. And then at 20 minutes, suddenly this fucking dreadful, like horror movie-esque soundscape just slams you as everyone has their mouth super open and just drooling down their faces, and you're like, what the fuck? I remember really like jumping in this chair like more than the horror movie. It's like, holy fucking shit. And then they started this other thing, and like the show was, I think a lot of people would find it bad, and I just a few minutes ago said that I don't like these things where people just do the same for 45 minutes, but here they were able to keep my attention for a long enough period of time by this slight change, which then comes to this extremely jarring, terrifying change into this other thing, which was super violent and also very repetitive. But the interesting part is that it kept my attention through the piece, and I remember it very clearly to this day.
Yeah, and cool.
I think that is something that is very, very interesting when it comes to performance in general, like being able to hold the attention, and if when bringing it back to handstands and hand balancing, it's just like, if you're like, are you contributing to the piece by doing another handstand at this point in time, or are you just trying to show off that, okay, I can do this one too? And I think, like, going back to the thing I started talking about in the beginning of this podcast, was that like when I was looking at all these acts years ago, I would often find it more interesting to see like a person starting on 2 arms, so that like you have a starting point, just like if we're talking energy the curve kind of dramaturgy. You start on 2 arms, perhaps there's some leg movements, some stuff. They have introduced a concept like I am standing on my hands and I'm displaying this to you. Then they go up and they perhaps do something that adds to it, whereas like maybe it's a 1 arm, maybe they walk in the circle on their hands, like maybe there's like there is an additive element to it, which means that like I am looking at the same concept but I'm not seeing the same. Then they go up, perhaps again, they do some 1 arms and things are getting rather impressive. Okay, the person is very skilled at this. And they've kind of displayed that. And like they go up a 4th time. They continue to do 1 arms. And perhaps like this time they do a little bit more complicated ones and they end by going down into a crocodile and they finish with a crocodile. So you've been up in 4 sequences. And then the question comes. So you're going to go up a 5th time. What are you adding? Like, are you, because you can do those couple of extra 1 arm shapes, but like you've kind of displayed your virtuosity, your control and your geometry on 1 arm twice already. So we're starting to see a flattening of like the interest curve or perhaps even a decline. So maybe you do that 5th time, you do some 1 arms and you do a really impressive one. And then are you going to go up a 6th time? Like, what are you adding then? And that's where like it starts being absolutely zero. And what I've found is that like, and I use this in my acts consciously too. On the last 1 arm, I usually do turning 1 arms. Not because it's the hardest. It looks very visually impressive for the audience. But what it does, it adds something. It adds an element of something. And that is also why the turning crocodile is so damn effective and impressive. Because it adds something. Suddenly, there's a new dimension that goes into it. Like, you could also remove a cane, do a 1 arm, like a 1 cane, or you could go on the really high cane and so on. And so that you kind of, you basically
increase
use
the risk or...
Yeah, you increase the risk, but I think like more fundamentally, you're adding to the attention. Like you're giving the audience an extra reason for keeping their attention on you at this point in time. And I think that's where it's important to like I think people also for their own sakes should be using like their impressive technique and the things they trained for years and so on. There is a value to that, but in the performative context, like asking the question like what am I adding, like what am I contributing with by doing this certain thing. So in terms of Váld too, that is like the question that we're constantly asking ourselves, like what are we bringing forth here when we are creating a group scene or a duet or a solo.
Oh, cool. I hope you're talking there because my Zoom just cut out for a second.
All right, I was talking, and is the internet connection better now?
Yeah, it's fine now.
Oh, excellent.
Anyway, I think it's a good point to wrap this up.
Yes, it's an hour of bloody blah.
I tell you, that was very interesting for me because I've always I've been watching this thing from behind the scenes for quite some time, and just watching you do it in your process and getting kind of filled in was good to get the overarching presentation of things
or rundown.
It was awesome. Thank you for that, Mikael. So anyway, just a bit of housekeeping as usual. So is there any set dates for performance, or where can we find out a bit more about this company of yours?
It's still kind of to be announced. We do have some premiere dates in February in France, but there's loads of kind of to be announced things there. So I would suggest to keep updated on the project. Follow us on Instagram at RWD Circus. We'll add that in the description, and also follow all of the other glorious artists that are in it, namely Matt Pasquette, Sunniva Byvard, Imogen Hustle, Lisa Matilda Angberg, and Isak Arvidsson. And we'll also link all of them in the description below.
Yeah, I think we're going to need to link them because everyone is just going to go, what are
what
those
the
names?
fuck did
How
he
do I
just
spell
say
those
right
names?
now? Yeah.
How do I do that A with the circle above it on my keyboard? Other than that, I'm really looking forward to seeing the show when it comes out, or just seeing a bit more about it. Other than that, we are Handstand Factory. We are supported by your purchase of our programs. If you like what we're doing, or if you want to get to the stage where you can perform like Mikael on handstands, please check out some of our courses. Other than that, thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week.
Cheers.